No, yeah, I think some people have described them as a pragmatic progressive, and I know that
That's another
for
word for
people out,
sellout.
damn,
Just kidding. I wanted to trigger you. That, but
pragmatic progressive of a moderate Dem. This is what a moderate Dem would be in other parts of the country.
that's just coded language to mean that he represents the interest of big business, and he probably takes a lot of money. Look, if you want to see how a politician is going to vote, just look at who donates to his campaign. So I'm gonna go see who's giving money to Alex Padilla, and I'll tell you how he'll vote. This is more tongue in cheek. It's not totally serious, but whenever I hear about a Latino that gets a new position like Alex Padilla, I
Hmm.
always think, well, that's good that he's Latino just because of the message that it sends to other Latino kids. But I don't forget that I grew up in Mexico, where every single politician is Mexican. You're from Colombia. Every single politician is Colombian. And how did that work
Mhm.
out for us?
All right, you're listening to the Brown Perspective. This is your host, Eduardo, and I'm here con el inigualable, el único, el carismático R.O.
What's happening?
For those of you who may not know, this week we learned, just yesterday actually, we learned that Governor Newsom did select Alex Padilla to be a senator from California, taking the seat that Kamala Harris will be leaving as she takes her place as Vice President of the United States. So it is symbolic because it is since California became a state or a U.S. territory, the Latino leadership had not been featured at the top levels of the state, and this is the first time in history that we have a Latino senator from the great state of California.
So his policies aside, and where he stands on those,
We'll get into that
yeah,
later, I
we'll get
know.
into those. How do you feel that this came at the expense of African Americans, or it could be perceived that way?
Yeah, and I know what you're referring to is that there was also a strong movement to try to have Newsom appoint an African American legislator or leader, African American woman, to hashtag keep the seat,
Right.
meaning having at least one black woman in the Senate. I think from my perspective, a few things. I think I initially was thinking, you know what, it's been such a long time, and we haven't had a Latino senator, and I think from the purposes of representation, the fact that I believe almost over what 50%. It seems like a lot of other parts are even larger percentage of Latinos. Maybe it's 40%. Maybe I'm not. I think it's about 40% of the population in California
Yeah.
is Latino. Not to have representation is also an issue. But then I also think that, you know what, like having an African American woman in the Senate is also important. And when you think about it, I think that a lot of the issues that that African American woman would fight for would be the issues that are most important for Latinos and other communities of color. And we historically there's always been this, I want to say, this coalition and this fact that African Americans, Latinos, indigenous inhabitants of this continent have been in the same boat together, and that we help each other. That a victory for an African American person is a victory for a Latino, for a Native American, for an Asian, etc. So there's this sense that we are trying to help each other, but there is a real question of, you know, can a Latino can better represent the issues, or can an African American person also represent the issues not only of the Latinos but other minorities?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for us to feel comfortable with this switch here because
Mhm.
we are getting Alex Padilla as a senator, and even what you were saying, where we're in this together. So in theory, a Latino senator should be able to help the African American community as much as an African American senator helps the Latino community. And I actually do feel that way when it comes to African Americans representing me, whether it's representatives or in the Senate or here at the state and local level. I've always felt
Hmm.
like that. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they're there and they're going to focus, if they are going to focus on their constituency, on the African American community, if they want to uplift that community, it suffers from so much discrimination, even more than Latinos, then that by default, helping them in a way, you're helping everyone else. That's always how
Yeah.
I felt. I think a lot of African Americans might feel that a Latino is just not going to represent blacks the same way
Hmm.
that a black person would, because there's a lot of racism within Latinos.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I can see why they would be upset at this. Maybe the silver lining is that, yeah, that they don't have Kamala Harris anymore or an African American as a senator, but they have a vice president. Although, again, I don't know how useful that is in terms of policy, because the vice president is off doing other things. There's a lot of power in the Senate. So, look, it depends on how you want to see this. I wish that it didn't have to be like this. I know that this is significant for the symbolism of having a Latino, but if they would have chosen another black person to take the seat of Kamala Harris, I think I would have been okay with that as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think this conversation brings up this whole, representation, political representation, and I know that we it kind of takes us to a point that you always like to make, which is that in some ways a politician from a different ethnicity than yours has to earn your trust, has to earn your votes. And I noticed that here in California, um, there is a lot of, well, I would say most of the African American elected officials that I know of, they have Latinos, Asians, and other people on their staff because they really want to connect to those constituency, to
Right.
those voters. Also understanding that traditionally, I think African Americans go to the polls and vote a lot more than others. But I think that they know that they need to earn their vote, that they need to provide services in language, that they also need to care about the issues that they care about, and that there are, I think when I think you represent that constituency, a constituency that's not your own more intentionally because you need to prove yourself and that you don't, you need to be come across as somebody, as a member, as a representative who represents those interests. And also obviously your own presence says a lot about, your own community and how others not only perceive that community, but the aspirations of younger people coming behind you.
Yeah, there's more work in convincing people that you understand their community and you can identify with it if that's not the community that you were brought up with. So I
Hmm.
agree with that. And actually, as we were talking about this, I hadn't even seen this third article here, but it said that some black leaders were angry, and I clicked on that article, and it said that about 6 hours after the announcement, Newsom said that he would nominate Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, who is black, let me point out, to be next Secretary of State. So that was
Hmm.
done in a way to quell some of the criticism. So let me read some quotes here. So many people believe the government will pay a political price. It's a terribly insensitive decision. Terribly insensitive? Is that how you
Hmm.
would characterize it? If Governor Newsom thinks our disappointment with the Kamala Harris replacement will be tempered by appointing an African American woman to be Secretary of State, he clearly does not know this constituency. When I heard the news about the Secretary of State appointment, my anger meter went from disappointment to being downright angry. That's interesting. So that means that this is probably what I mentioned. It part of the reason why there's so much anger is because, again, black people don't feel like Latinos are going to represent their best interest,
Hmm.
whereas we feel like they will, but we're biased because we're Latinos, and we
Yeah.
also happen to be more progressive. Alex Padilla, more middle of the road. I don't. We were reading at some of his voting record from before, and I'm more interested actually to see where he stands on issues like Medicare for all or other progressive issues. So personally, I'm disappointed because he's not nearly as progressive as I would like him to be. He hasn't taken a stance on defunding the police or even a stance on abolishing or changing the nature of ICE and then the big one is the Medicare for all. So
Mhm. No, yeah, I think some people have described them as a pragmatic progressive, and I know that
that's another
for
word for
people out,
sellout.
damn,
Just kidding. I wanted to trigger you. That, but
pragmatic progressive of a moderate Dem. This is what a moderate Dem would be in other parts of the country.
that's just coded language to mean that he represents the interest of big business, and he probably takes a lot of money. Look, if you want to see how a politician is going to vote, just look at who donates to his campaign. So I'm gonna go see who's giving money to Alex Padilla, and I'll tell you how he'll vote.
Hmm.
Right, and it's probably going to be money that's coming from a lot of interests, and those are the interests that he's going to represent. So middle of the road means that, yeah, he's not a Republican, which is good, right? He's not terrible, but he's also not a progressive.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to highlight that in some ways, Alex Padilla, who became, I think, one of the youngest members of the LA City Council when he became a council member and at age of 26, I think in some ways he got politically involved when Prop 187 came through, right? So I
Yep.
think he's talked about that, and I think we all know that here in California, the aftermath of Prop 186 was to 187, I'm sorry, was to really ignite and motivate the Latino community to get organized politically, to get elected, and do all those things, similar to what's happening in Arizona right now. So it's interesting to also put his victory in the context that where it started, right? It started where in a very anti-immigrant environment that I know we've discussed and covered during this podcast, this
Yeah.
conversation.
Even the language that they're using in this article, what Padilla and Newsom gets a political soulmate and loyalist. I don't want a guy that, like, I don't want to hear that the senator is loyal to some other politician. Maybe you're comfortable with this type of language, but no, look, this guy should care about if he's going to be a senator. His loyalty should lie with whatever his people need, not with some other government who appointed him. So this is the
Yeah.
problem again with politicians, right? And it's so common that this article highlights it as a positive. And I was like, I read this and I don't see this as a positive.
Well, it's positive because that's one of the reasons that I'm sure he got nominated. And I think the fact is that, yes, I mean, he can, once he gets appointed and once he gets sworn in, I mean, in this case, it's different because he only has 2 years to build his campaign. But the good thing is that he's run for statewide office twice and won, so he's a known quantity. So he should have a relatively easy time as getting reelected in 2022. But I guess we will see. But I think once he gets that full term, which is 6 years, I think he'll have 2 years in the Senate. I think he'll be able to have more autonomy, which not to say that he's not going to have more autonomy from Newsom. I think it just means that it's somebody who he's worked with, who has been politically aligned with the past, and that they just happen to agree on a number of issues, and one of the reasons why Newsom decided to give him the nod.
Right, which means that if he's loyal to Newsom, then he'll be loyal to any other Democrat that has either helped him before or that is there to help him, which means that he won't break from voting with the Democrats. He won't push for something like Medicare for all.
Well, he can, right? But it depends on how he wants to
Not
do
if
it and
he's
how.
loyal.
This is the thing with politics. That in some ways, it's sort of what you expect your family, right? You expect that if you help your family, for them to, quote unquote, be loyal, to help you when you need to, and also to enjoy when you get to a position of success. But to your point, I think you also need to be in a position where you say, you know what, this is wrong. I'm not going to do this, or no, I can't do that for whatever reason. But I think that's what politics is all about.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is. I mean, that's the reality of it, and it's unfortunate because it shouldn't be like that. I mean, it's normalized now where we think that, oh, that's okay. Somebody helps somebody, they help each other. It's a big club. Once you get to Washington, they're all in it to try to help each other, and meaning that once you become loyal to somebody, you're likely not to go away from that. So if everyone within the Democratic establishment is loyal to each other and loyal to to whatever external influences they have from companies, then yeah, no wonder that you can never get something like Medicare for all, because this doesn't benefit a big sector of our economy, the insurance industry and other industries that donate to the Democrats. So if they're all in the same club and they're all loyal to each other, then of course you're not gonna get change. So again, unfortunately, that's the nature of politics, and you change this, but you change it gradually by putting more progressives and people that are not going to Washington just to be loyal to each other. I was gonna say this in the beginning, but this is more tongue in cheek. It's not totally serious, but whenever I hear about a Latino that gets a new position like Alex Padilla, I
Hmm.
always think, well, that's good that he's Latino, just because of the message that it sends to other Latino kids. But I don't forget that I grew up in Mexico, where every single politician is Mexican. You're from Colombia, every single politician is Colombian, and how did that work
Hmm.
out for us?
That's true. Yeah, not that well, because we weren't
Exactly.
part of the right societal group in Colombia or Mexico to be benefit from that.
Yeah, you have to be part of the wealth, of the class with the
Of
wealth,
La
with the
Rosca.
resources. Yeah, yeah. So just remember that these politicians is good because it means that more representation, you're more likely to get people that care about your community. But it also, don't give these politicians your blind support. You have to look at how they're voting. You have to look at what they're actually doing for you. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how what kind of job he does, and maybe hopefully he does shift a little to the left, if that's possible for any of these guys, and starts advocating for Medicare for all once the pressure is big enough. Because I have a feeling that this eventually will happen, but the pressure has to come from the people. Right now, they all give us excuses for why they can't fund Medicare for all, but if enough people organize and start demanding this, and we start putting enough pressure on them, then you get to a point where they all say, oh, they all start saying this is the right thing to do. This is to help the people. They just change their message from one day to the other, just based on the pressure that people put on them.
Yeah, I mean, you have to change the public will, and then with that public will, you change the politics. But that takes a lot of work, takes years, it takes a lot of discipline. But I think that's how we've made progress in this country. And I do think that giving this reaction, and I think this was somewhat anticipated too, that I think Senator to be Senator designate Padilla is going to work hard to earn as much support from the African American community leaders here in California as he can, because he knows that that's something that's being questioned as his weakness. So we'll see if perhaps some of those more progressive stands come because of also him wanting to align himself with the interest of the African American voters here in the state of California.
Yeah. And I'll end this on a positive note, at least this section here on the Green New Deal. Although he has not taken a stance on the Green New Deal proposal, which is unfortunate, but at least he is predictably has a strong environmental voting record in this state senate, and but also has historically pushed for environmental legislation that went beyond even what members of his own party were considering. So here, just
There you go.
a glimmer of hope here from
Hmm.
him that he
He's a fighter. He's brewed with that fighting spirit.
yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but at least right. So if he's good on the environment, and he has gone beyond what was expected of him, so that's good. That's at least that's good. That's a good positive quality to have. That you understand that's setting the bar really low these days for these politicians, but I'll take whatever they give me.
Yeah, even within climate change, with climate, which I think is an important issue here in California.
Yeah. So I don't know what else to say to our black brothers out there. It sucks. Maybe when the next Senate seat opens up, we can try to help them get a black male or female in there, so that we have a Latino and a black senator from
Yeah,
California.
that would be amazing. Yeah, and I think I would also want to say that I know my appreciation, because I realize as an immigrant, I know that I um, I have benefited from the fights of the civil rights, from the programs that in so many ways were designed and geared to helping African American community. I think what I will share is that as a Latino whose people have been also impacted, who in some ways our stories are very much tied together, and that this a lot of the suffering that happened here in the United States that happened throughout Latin America, where actually there's a lot more African Americans, African descendants, just because that was just
Mm-hmm.
the reality and remains the reality, right? That's where the agriculture and all these things happen. But I think all that to say that, I personally appreciate the work and the sacrifices and how you have have helped us get to this point. And I hope that Senator Padilla and other elected officials who also care about the African American, who also care about helping others, step up and help us get to a better place together, right? Because I think that's the idea, that we get to a place where we'll be, we'll be like in Mexico and Colombia or any other part of the world, where you're not really worried discussing, even though you should, race and ethnicity, but really focusing on what needs to get done, policies, and things that benefit our broader society.
Yeah, and a big part of that will be us putting pressure on Padilla once he goes to the Senate to keep doing these
Hmm.
things, because these politicians, you don't just send them off to Washington and then forget about them, because then they go and they do all their backroom deals and they forget about you. You have to put pressure on them so that they can keep fighting for you, because that's the only way that they stay on top of your needs.
Awesome. And thank you so much for listening to our conversations. Again, we encourage you to follow us on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook at The Brown Perspective.
Nos vemos.
Ciao.